When it comes to video games, we work bloody hard for our endings. All of the blood, sweat and tears and hours of grinding that we put in to see our favourite titles come to a close is quite astonishing. But it's difficult to experience these 10 video games without feeling like the developers are straight up laughing at you for forking over your hard-earned cash in the first place. So let's take a look at them. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video game endings that totally trolled players. Number 10. Another cliffhanger? Shenmue 3. Shenmue, or as I like to call it, SHENMUE, was finally released in 2019, almost an entire 20 years after Shenmue 2 hit stores and left fans on an epic cliffhanger, with our protagonist Ryo's quest to avenge his father's death still incomplete. Though franchise creator Yu Suzuki was upfront about the fact that he had plans for Shenmue 4 and Shenmue 5, fans still had the reasonable expectation that, given how much effort it took to will a third game into existence in the first place, that it would bring some sort of open-ended closure to our protagonist's story. Instead, Shenmue rewarded patient fans by leaving them hanging yet again. Players briefly fight the killer Lan Di right at the end of the game, after which the villain escapes and a closing title insists the story goes on. Considering the mixed response to the sequel and the likelihood that a fourth game won't muster the same nostalgia-fueled interest, it was a bold gamble to put fans back in the same agonizing holding pattern that they were in 20 years ago. After waiting so long, fans deserved better than a mediocre game which had the gall to effectively beg them to crowdfund the next one. Number 9. The cheap killer reveal. Heavy Rain. Heavy Rain marked a major artistic step up for developer Quantic Dream and their unique interactive drama style of video games, though it also wasn't without writer-director David Cage's now customary storytelling indulgences. The thriller, centered around a serial killer called the Origami Killer, spectacularly implodes in the final stretch when it's revealed that one of the game's 4 playable characters, P.I. Scott Shelby, was actually the killer all along. The problem with this reveal and everything that follows it is that it completely invalidates the player's perspective throughout the game. Now, up until this point, the clear implication is that the gameplay is an objective depiction of events, but given that an earlier scene in an antique shop made it physically impossible for Shelby to be the killer, this late-stage twist felt like a cheap moving of the goalposts for the sake of shock value. We thought that we were playing a matter-of-fact story when, actually, it was an unreliable representation of what happened. Nothing in the game leading up to the reveal hints at this deception, and so many players felt cheated by Cage's lazy writing. Though players can arrive at several different endings after Shelby is revealed to be the killer, the lousy twist just sucked so much air out of the story that you couldn't really be blamed for losing interest entirely. Number 8. Say what now? Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty. Nobody delivers a batch ending quite like Hideo Kojima, who has practically made an art out of it throughout the Metal Gear Solid franchise. And though Metal Gear Solid 5 left everyone agape with its final bait-and-switch reveal, Metal Gear Solid 2 features his most aggressive act of player trolling. After Raiden defeats Solidus Snake in the final boss fight, Kojima forces players to sit through a snooze-inducing dialogue exchange between Raiden and Solid Snake, where they discuss the nature of reality, memes, the future, free will, and of course, the shadowy cabal known as the Patriots. Between all of this, the abundance of live-action footage of New York City, a bizarre jazz music soundtrack, and a weird reunion between Raiden and Rose, it's a boatload of WTF moments packed into an overly verbose 20-minute package. And that's without even mentioning the post-credits tag, where it's revealed that the Patriots, the enigmatic figures that you've been chasing the entire game, have been dead for 100 years. It's certainly a high-minded ending that feels ahead of its time in many, many ways, but it's also not entirely unlike the infamous architect scene from The Matrix Reloaded, a giant, convoluted word salad to say something that's actually pretty simple when you break it down. Number 7. Another downer LGBT ending. Life is Strange. As much as Life is Strange has been lauded as a breakthrough game for LGBT representation, it also commits the cardinal sin of rehashing perhaps the most tired and infuriating trope in queer media. The much maligned bury your gays trope refers to the excessive incidence of death and tragedy in LGBT relationships in all form of media, particularly movies, TV, and now video games. And though Life is Strange features 2 distinct endings which allow Max and Chloe's relationship to play out differently, neither of them are ultimately particularly happy ones. In the end, Max is forced to choose between sacrificing the town of Arcadia Bay in order to save Chloe, or sacrificing Chloe in order to save the town. Either Chloe dies or the town is destroyed, presumably killing many, many people in the process. Even if Max and Chloe end up together, this air quotes happy ending is entirely tainted by the blood that Max now has on her hands as a result. It's not really moving things forward when you break it down like that, is it? Number 6. Changing the timeline. Final Fantasy VII Remake. Final Fantasy VII's remake's ending caught just about every fan by surprise, regardless of whether they actually dug it or not. Though most understandably assumed that it would follow the beats of the original game relatively closely, the ending of the first volume marked a major departure from the previous continuity. Final Fantasy VII Remake is effectively a meta remake that incorporates the 1997 original into its own story as an alternate timeline, one which the game deviates from at the end by having Zack survive compared to his very famous and pretty emotional death in the original Final Fantasy VII. Now, this stirred up plenty of discussion about the possibility of Aerith's death being undone in one of the remake's sequels, but considering that most fans realistically know that they could be waiting anywhere from 3 to 10 years for Remake Part 2, I mean, it is Square Enix after all, it truly is an ending that is as frustrating as it is fascinating. Number 5. You're actually the bad guy. Braid. Jonathan Blow's indie smash hit Braid is remembered for its ingenious puzzle design and superbly executed twist ending, which entirely subverted genre expectations while making the player feel incredibly bad about things. So players control Tim, who spends the game searching for a princess who's been kidnapped by a horrible and evil monster. Except the final level brilliantly flips the script on the typical save the princess trope. As though the princess appears to be fleeing from a monstrous knight, the princess is actually running in reverse. Simply, she's not escaping from the knight, she's running to him and away from Tim himself. Tim, it turns out, is the real monster. And though the precise nature of Tim's relationship with the princess is kept ambiguous, it's clear that he did something horrible to merit her fleeing from him so desperately. You thought you were the hero, but unfortunately you were the villain all along. Number 4. A giant meaty blob out of nowhere. Inside. With another indie sensation comes another unforgettable troll job of an ending. Inside is an atmospheric puzzle platformer in which players control a young boy as he attempts to navigate a dark dystopian world and evade capture. There's a tremendous amount of subtlety to the game's narrative and aesthetic, though this is hurled totally out of the window in the final 10 minutes of the game, where it takes a sharp left turn into David Cronenberg-inspired body horror territory. The boy eventually comes face to face with a gigantic fleshy blob known as the Huddle, with its various grabbing limbs eventually pulling the boy into its biomass, where the player is then given control of the Huddle for the game's final sequence. Here you're tasked with escaping from the Huddle's laboratory confinement by any means necessary, smashing through windows and obliterating anybody who gets in your way, before finally rolling down a hill and coming to a stop at a sun-topped cliff edge. And just like that, the game ends abruptly. Now, fans have debated the exact meaning of this ending ever since, but it's safe to say that nobody expected the game to go, well, there in such a balmy final stretch. Number 3. All of the endings. The Stanley Parable. The Stanley Parable is a game which toys and tinkers with the very idea of conventional video game narrativity, and it carries that through to all of its endings, all 19 of them. Though many of them are unsatisfying by nature, all of them are willfully weird and intended to leave players scratching their heads. In one ending, the narrator relishes your impending demise, in another you end up going to heaven, and in another you're forced to play a minigame where you must stop a baby and a puppy being burned to death for literally 4 hours. Yup, some of the endings are funny, some of the endings are annoying, but all at the peak of video game absurdism, a cosmic joke about the goal-orientated nature of the medium. Number 2. Pick a color, any color. Mass Effect 3. Now, BioWare weren't intending to troll players with Mass Effect 3's ending, but that's unfortunately exactly what they did by over-promising things. After claiming pre-release that the game's climax would factor in an entire trilogy's worth of choices in order to give players their own fluid, distinct ending, fans were infuriated to discover that the ending actually boiled down to a simple pick-a-color trio of choices. The expected granularity was nowhere to be seen, with players instead getting one of 3 pre-baked, rather depressingly similar endings: control the Reapers, destroy destroy the Reapers or merge organic and synthetic life, which were defined in the most on-the-nose terms by 3 separate colours. The fan outcry was unprecedented at the time, with calls for BioWare to fix the endings proving vocal enough that they released an extended cut DLC which added context to each of the endings. However, it wasn't until the release of the Citadel DLC an entire year later that many fans felt like they'd been given a truly worthy resolution to the trilogy, and even then, perhaps not. At number 1, Peter Molyneux strikes again. Curiosity, what's inside the cube? The curious case of Curiosity, What's Inside the Cube is unique in that it involves an entire ending which effectively trolled just a single player. So Curiosity was an experimental video game from the industry's most famous snake oil salesman, Peter Molyneux, a collaborative online experience where players had to tap a gigantic floating cube in order to dig through its various layers and discover what indeed was inside the cube. Except the catch was that only a single player who tapped the last tile would figure out what the life-changingly amazing contents actually were, and it would be up to them whether or not they shared it with the world or not. In the end, Edinburgh resident Brian Henderson was the winner of the game, and also decided to reveal his prize to the world. Henderson was given the ability to be the single god character in Molyneux's upcoming god game, Goddess. God, that's a lot of gods. And would also receive a small portion of the game's revenue. But in a predictable anticlimax from the famous under-deliverer, Goddess never actually moved beyond its early access release in 2013, and Henderson never received either his godly powers or the aforementioned payout. Henderson may have been the unfortunate victim of another over-ambitious, undercooked Molyneux game, but everyone desperate to see what Curiosity's box contained was left feeling rather shortchanged by the outcome. And there we go, my friends. Those were 10 video game endings that totally trolled players. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below. As always, I've been Jules. You can go chat to me over on Twitter at RetroJ with a 0, or you can swing by Live and Let's Dice. That's Dice with a C, where I do all of my streaming and Warhammer Battle reports outside of work, and it'd be great to see you over there. But before I go, just want to say one thing to you, my friend. Even though we spoke today about endings that ended on a bit of a dour note, and sometimes that might happen in our own real lives as well, with scenarios not working out the way that we intended them to, just remember to be kind to yourself, treat yourself with love and respect, my friend, because even when you are down, you are definitely not out. You just need to pick yourself back up again. Surround yourself by friends, family, professionals in the support industry, because these people care about you and want you to do well, and go out there and smash it like the big ledge that I know you are. Massive love to you, my friend. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.